to our webinar this afternoon. We've got an amazing guest who's taken time out of his afternoon, and we're super grateful. Knowing that we're just starting to let people trickle in, we'll take the next 1 to 2 minutes to let everyone get situated. And then we're going to kind of hop into the meat and potatoes, which we're really excited to go through here. So we'll give everyone a few more minutes, then we'll get started. Do you remember, Dr. Glazier, where I know we're on? Do you remember where you and I met for the first time?
Yeah, I do.
Starbucks Cafe at VEW.
Yeah, that's right. I remember us sitting down talking in the exhibit hall right by the doors and at a couch.
I knew who you were, and I remember passing you, and I was like, "That's the guy I got to talk to."
And you were the guy I got to talk to too, so it worked out well.
Awesome. All righty, oh, you go?
No, go ahead.
Everyone, just want to welcome you all and thank you for attending our middle of the day webinar. We had a lot of attendees, and if you're able to join us live, that's great. If not, we'll be able to share this recording after. And just to kind of hop into it, I want to introduce our star of the show. I'm just here to moderate and provide my tidbits through the year, is the great Dr. Alan Glazier. And obviously many of you know him and probably registered through his amazing Facebook group. And he's a great entrepreneur and has a ton of knowledge on the business of optometry and really what it takes to run a successful clinical and business operation. Dr. Glazier, thank you for being with us today.
Thank you. That was quite an intro there, Cory. I appreciate you and what you're doing as well.
Thank you. Just a little bit about myself. I have been an entrepreneur for the last 8 years, really by chance, but I think it was deeply embedded within my blood. I got started as an employee from Weave in healthcare 10 years ago and ended up purchasing part of Weave 8 years ago. Together across the lines of business, I think we have about 700 optometry focused VAs, but we have well over 1,000 dental, optometry, and also vet team members. And why I share those things is we've seen the good and the bad and the ugly of what it takes to run a practice well. Obviously, we're not experts, but we're able to see people implement and solve and innovate their practices in really cool ways. And, getting a very large view of that has given us some really interesting data that we'll share later today. Where I want to kick it off is Dr. Glazier was gracious enough to allow us to run a poll about 9 months ago. And the question asked was, as an eye care professional, what is your greatest challenge in running a practice? And those results, though there was a lot of options, were really damning. And it is managing cost and profitability and managing HR and staffing issues. And so the goal of the next hour with you and us today is to talk about how can you run a modern optometry practice. And before Dr. Glazier and I went on air, we were talking about AI. Business today is moving faster than it ever has. And so we've got to innovate and change. A great quote that I will paraphrase is, if we keep doing the same thing and expecting a different outcome, it's the definition of insanity. And Einstein. Business, whether we like it or not, is changing at the fastest pace it ever has. And so we have to do things different to manage our overhead, to drive a profitable practice. And let's acknowledge, we all went to school to be trained clinically. I did not, but the rest of you did. And you have great clinical knowledge and you have passion for clinical optometry, but part of running a successful practice is managing teams and managing the staffing issues that come. And so we're going to talk through ways that people are really successful and things that you can do to apply this to your own practice. Dr. Glazier, anything you would like to add here?
Yeah, no, it was no dummy that came up with that quote. I mean, that was Albert Einstein that said that. So I would listen to him. One thing you can understand that he said, right?
As we kind of hop into it, I want to take those two main sections where people responded in the poll and really dive into how do you manage cost and profitability? And from your perspective, how has it changed over the last couple of years and even beyond that?
You know, it seems like it's always a sky is falling kind of situation where as things change, you always feel like, oh my God, how am I going to deal with this challenge? How am I going to deal with that challenge? And you have, at least from my perspective, there was a time in my career where I could deal with those challenges. I always try and find a creative way around them. It got to the point, 30 years in where I'm like, all right, I could deal with that, but I don't feel like dealing with it anymore. But when you're in the thick of it, you got to get creative. You've got to look not only inside optometry for answers, but outside of the box. Look at other industries, other service industries, find out creative ways that people are adapting to the changes and find a way to apply it to what you're dealing with. We in optometry have that sky is falling kind of outlook often. We often feel like, oh, I should have picked a different career because I don't like this. I don't like dealing with vision insurance. I don't like that. But the reality is every career has its challenges. If you had gone into podiatry, if you gone into been MD, you would have been dealing with the similar problems. And so it's not, you have to be a glasses full. First, you have to be a glasses full, full person, glasses half full person, and attack these problems. Don't look at them as things that, let you down. Second of all, I tell people you have to throw stuff at the wall and see what sticks. Not everything's going to stick. I've had more failures, and any successful entrepreneur will tell you that more failures than I've had successes, but I always pick myself up, and move on to the next challenge. So those are the important things. As far as like what's different, it's just a lot. There's a lot of challenges that have always been around, but they just take on a little different face. They're the same old challenges. When you quoted that that poll, I bet if you went to any industry, you would find, definitely HR is the biggest challenge. And depending on how you are with people and who you have delegated those jobs to, and, the money side of things, like that's always, it's a business thing. It's not just an optometry thing.
Exactly. And there's some interesting data that we collected in the preparation. And it's interesting data that is pretty correlated across all of retail healthcare, but really widely seen in optometry. And if I were to make a visual analogy with my hands right now, is we all know that costs in all of America, whether you're buying bacon or hiring staff, is getting really expensive. And obviously we have some expertise in staffing. And so since 2019, the average front desk or more business administrative roles have increased by 24%. And so going back to the analogy, you've got a floor that's going up. And we also know that weave or adit and our gloves and our triple net rent, all of that, because everybody else is paying for the same milk and eggs that are crazy expensive. All of those are continuing to go up. And the problem that we then face is reimbursement rates are not moving up at the same rate. And so you have a ceiling that is marginally, moving up maybe, or stagnant, or even in some cases down, but then you have a floor that's creeping up. And the reality is in between those two things gets stuck the clinician, because you've got to pay your staff more. You've got to re-sign for your lease. You've still got to pay for your EHR. And so I think where things have continued to evolve at a high rate, I agree that what we see, history continues to repeat itself. And that squeeze we've felt of increased overhead and lower profitability over the last few years is very apparent in numbers.
Mm-hmm. And the dollar's worth less on top of that. So it's a triple whammy.
You have a really interesting purview of talking to a ton of practice owners and seeing a ton of feedback. What are ways that you are seeing practices kind of overcome this problem? Because the reality is we're caught in the sandwich. And instead of just saying, oh no, the sandwich is squeezing me, you nailed it, that you got to do something different. And sometimes as an entrepreneur, you're going to throw mud on the wall and it's going to stick or it's not going to stick. And so from your purview, how are practices successfully solving this?
You have to be strategic, first of all. And that's a pretty big generalization. But what I mean is you have to become a numbers-based practice. You have to understand what works and what doesn't work. You have to understand how much it costs for you to see a patient, how much do you earn from that patient, so that you can decide whether or not that particular vision plan or insurance is worth having. That's the number one thing. And that's the number one thing that most practices don't do. You also have to understand marketing. You know, when you take a vision plan, what you're doing is you're taking a discount for them supposedly putting butts in your chair. And if that discount is more than it costs you to see that patient, you're actually losing money. And that's a serious thing. I know from being a practitioner that if there's not patients in my chair, I'm feeling like I'm losing money. But I never really took the time when I was younger to think, gosh, if I have a patient in that chair, maybe I'm still losing money. And you are. The numbers show that that's the case. So you want to make sure that's called your chair cost, and make sure that your chair cost is through each insurance or through each benefit you take is profitable. Because if it's not, that time that person's in your chair could be spent empty with you putting an effort into another part of your practice that is driving revenue, like marketing or strategizing. You're much better off doing that and driving in, perhaps if you're lucky, you can drive in cash paying patients. I came up with a term called the independent loyalist patient. There's always people out there, and we've all had them, who come in and say, oh, I came in here because you're a real doctor, or I came in here because I didn't want to go to one of those retail places. And they're out there. But if your marketing isn't geared towards them, they may not find you. And they're much more valuable to your practice. I once heard a practice management consultant say, would you rather have 1 million patients paying you $1 each, or one patient paying you $1 million? And the answer is obvious. The difference is in the amount of work you have to put in and the amount of time you have to put in. Obviously, the latter option is the better there. And that's what you're doing with insurance. You're getting more patients, but making less money at them. Is that the model you want? It feels like if you drop one of those plans, you'll never get another patient, but that's not the case. And time again in notice on Facebook, there have been posts, and I love them when the doctors say, guess what? I finally took the jump. I dropped that vision plan, and now I couldn't believe what happened, how great it was. You know, everything they said happened in a good way. So I would say marketing, you know, I mean, we could go on and on about the different areas. You know, with the latest situation in terms of tariffs, material prices are going up. So you have to find ways around that. You want to try and perhaps source nationally if you can. And, you know, but those companies that make national frames are raising their prices too, because they get their parts often from internationally. So just pay attention to the climate, the business climate, and adjust for other things as needed. But that's the biggest thing I could think of. One thing optometrists are really guilty of is not doing marketing or doing it right.
This is super fascinating. So I took some notes while you were saying that. Number one thing that I almost just want to emphasize for everybody here, there's some true gold bars. Number one, do you understand your numbers? It's one thing to say, okay, I'm not as profitable, or my overhead is struggling. Do you really know where that's going? And the reality is, for most of us in business, we do not fully understand our numbers, whether it be the accuracy of the numbers or digesting what's actually happening. You're looking at your P&L, but are you deeply understanding the financial mechanics of your business? Because if you don't, you cannot make changes. Second thing, and I found it so insightful and have a personal story to share, is you mentioned about the marketing of profitable patients. And you mentioned, would you rather have 1 million patients who pay you $1, or, you know, a smaller select amount of people who value your services and pay you well for it? When I bought my first business, I'm 31 today. And when I bought my first business, I was 22. And I had not graduated from BYU. I had taken some economics and some finance classes. I was wet between the ears and thought I was good and truly knew nothing. And when we started the first company, focused on revenue growth. And 5 years in, we had lost millions of dollars, not paid ourselves anything because we were focused on volume instead of actual productive, long-lasting relationships. And I think in our world today, there's certain things that are sensationalized. How big is your practice? When really what matters is, how do you treat your patients? How do you treat your staff? And how are you treating yourself and taking home income? And one of the biggest things that turned around the original company that I owed is making the hard, right decision. And we danced around that for years of like, well, this customer pays us a lot of money every month. It was unprofitable to have them. And we stressed and taxed ourselves and our team. And one day when we finally, needed to make the change because the business was not going to make it, it was a gun against our head. The business significantly over the next, 6 to 12 months turned around. And it's what you're talking about with vision plans and other forms of marketing of we sometimes in our gut know what we need to do with members of our team or things to drive the profitable practice that we all want. We have to make the hard, right decisions.
And also, by the way, happy birthday. Wow. So this is what you're doing on your birthday?
No, it's not no. I'm 31 now. No, but it's not my birthday today. Even if it was my birthday, I would still be here. There's no one I would rather spend than with you.
I'm messing with you. But the other thing is, we talked about the revenue side there, but then there's the expense side. And, in every office, your largest expense is your payroll and your staff. And that's why, this is no way is, I'm not saying this because we're in the team webinar and, what you guys do is really valuable on that side. So paying attention to that, not a lot of doctors don't even know that's their biggest expense. If you're the kind of doctor who doesn't, like you said, who doesn't understand the numbers or doesn't want to understand them, because sometimes it's easier to look away, hire people who can explain them to you in plain English. And then when they do, you'll find those areas that are your highest expenses and realize, hey, I got to make some changes here, because until you do, you're not going to make any profit or much less than you could.
Remind me what state you're in.
Maryland, outside of PC.
I'm going to pull something fun up for us here. We're going to audible off the plan because you said something really interesting. And I think it's worth going deeper on providing visibility and understanding. I have a tool that I'm going to share here just for a second. Mm-hmm. And then we'll go back to the deck. But we, from doing this for a long time, have then been able to calculate the average cost of staff. Now, people compensate their own team members in their own ways, but let's just go here to Maryland. And if you were to look at a customer service, more front office scheduling related role, your average wage within Maryland right now is $19.7 an hour. And then obviously there's other related fees, and there's even healthcare costs that we're not factoring because, different people will do it different ways.
That's just the hour.
So what you just called out, and to educate people more about why international hiring makes a lot of sense, is when you can hire someone in Brazil or the Philippines or other parts of the globe, you can pay less while still getting really good quality. But what's interesting is we're talking about overhead and profitability, increasing that margin or delta. And if you look at the average cost of having someone international versus having someone on your US payroll, you're driving $22,791 a year of difference. Whether people use team or not, I don't want this to be about team, but truly educating people when you understand how much money is going to staff. I deeply believe that our front desk team members that are interacting with patients every day are some of the most important members of our team. But there's certain things that definitely don't need to take place there. Verifying insurance, following up on patient billing, where you're not diminishing the level of care. But at the same time, if we're getting squoze by lowered reimbursement rates and continued rising costs, we have to do things different. And this money can go to pay your office manager more on the raise that's owed, but you're not able to afford, or for the investment of new software or new technology within the practice. And it's something where you can make that change, and people can go on and actually go through and see what the average cost is in their state. And you can even go switch between a scribe and a bunch of different roles to get that data. Just as we talked about having visibility and understanding, this is kind of addressing it straight out. So people just don't hear, oh, it's less. It's what can it actually make a difference in?
You know, and that difference, by the way, that's the straight up difference. If you freed up that money, you may put it in your pocket, or maybe you'll use it to go get those independent loyalists and make that delta even greater. There's a lot of things you can do with that extra money, you know, so that's the baseline. And where can people get this map?
If they go to our website,
okay.
If they just click resources, there's a cost savings calculator.
Yeah, that's incredible. I mean, that's a lot of money per employee too.
And what this isn't about is just driving profitability, but then taking care and investing in the areas you know sometimes you're missing within your practice. And then I'm going to switch back to our deck here. There's one other thing that I want to notice while I was, while I was listening to you. Obviously, I have an outside view of optometry practices. And if you look at the data that we have here in our slide, that appointments over the last few years have been pretty stagnant. And what I think people think about, and you talked about it with marketing, is you have to have a schedule that's optimized and busy. And I think people oftentimes look at, okay, well, I need to then drive new patients in, and you do. But often people do not realize how much opportunity they're missing that has called in, but the phone hasn't been picked up, or they haven't been called back. Are you working your recare list? Are you confirming your appointments? And the analogy that I would make here is people are looking for more gold when there's gold bars laden throughout their practice that drive better relationships and clinical care, and at the same time fill the schedule in an optimal way with patients who know you. People do not realize how much they're missing, going back to your point, because there's not great visibility around where they're missing it.
Right. You want me to comment on that?
Oh, no, I was clicking over the next slide.
Awkward pause.
You and I have done this for long enough now where if there's a little silence, I'm totally cool with it.
Very, very uncomfortable there.
Next, we kind of want to hop into the second biggest and emphasized area of it is really difficult to run a practice with the current staffing issues people are facing. And there's a term that was commonly recognized during COVID as the Great Resignation. And there is a greater level of turnover on average within the front desk of an optometry practice. They turn over at 29% a year. And something important that I want to call out here is people look at the work done at front of an optometry practice from an outside perspective and think it's simple. There is so much intricate knowledge around insurance, clinical demands, unique scheduling, and all of the different systems. When you have someone that is consistently turning through your practice, just as we talked about a second ago with kind of hidden costs around missed calls, people lose a lot of efficiency when they're consistently having to train and rehire. And when you're clinically practicing 8 hours every day, and then someone comes and taps your shoulder and says, hey, Michelle just resigned, that's where it takes a huge wear.
Yeah. Not to mention the cost it takes to, train someone and then have them leave.
There's an interesting study from Deloitte that came out years ago, but you can look up by the roles, the actual, what they consider to be hidden costs of having to retrain someone. And the lowest hidden cost I think was a like simplistic call center, which I would not put in the optometry bucket. Like this is Delta or T-Mobile. And when they had a resignation, it cost them 3.5 months of salary to ramp that person back up to a considerable measure, and then the wear that it takes on your team. And so what many people are doing is they're realizing, what are the people that I need in practice, so that they're building those real authentic patient relationships. We're checking people in and out. We're getting everything done. But then they're also augmenting their team with virtual team members. You look at it and you look at Weave and a lot of the other amazing VoIP technology, Alan, that we have today. And my phone at my office can ring, and I can be in Mexico City and my phone's going to ring at the same time. And I think the idea that everything had to be done within the brick and mortar of a practice is a thought of 20 years ago, because now we truly have the technology where the work can be done anywhere, and it's not clunky for the patient. They're calling and it can ring on your iPhone, and then you can schedule directly into your software where you're, again, getting those team members that work internationally that you can pay really well. And then you've got your team in office focused on the patients and the relationships that provide the most value. Next, we wanted to talk about, with those challenges, just as we mentioned, like what can be delegated within a practice. And what is commonly being done right now is getting help on the front desk, getting help on scribing, getting help with revenue cycle management. And a lot of those areas can be focused on, and missed opportunity can be picked up further.
If you delegating is such, I mean, this is hindsight because I didn't learn it till relatively late in my career how important it was to delegate. Most people, and not just optometrists, most people who are business owners are not very good delegators. They're actually better micromanagers, which has a negative draw on your ability to earn. The better a delegator you are, the more you stand to earn. And the proof is in the pudding. The people who have grown 50 practices location, 10 or more practice locations, these people have some natural ability and some learned ability to be really excellent delegators. I had to learn, I was not a great delegator. I was more of a micromanager, but I had to learn how much that was hurting my business and gradually get comfortable with delegating. And I can tell you to this day, I'm a much better delegator than I ever was, but I'm still not the best. And that is the constraint to being a super high earner in our practices. So that's one of the reasons that I feel this is such an important slide. And I can't emphasize enough how much time you should put into becoming a better delegator, or at least identifying the constraints in your practice that are due to human resource and fixing them, because human resource problems aren't always who's in the chair and who you're dealing with their drama. It's often, do you have the right amount of staff in the right places to let the patients flow through the right way? There's an excellent book that anybody here, I would strongly recommend you read. I talk about this in almost every webinar I do. It's called The Goal by Goldrath, Goldrath is the guy that wrote the book. And it talks about, then you have to become good at identifying the constraints in your office. And once you can see those, you become better at identifying them, solve them sooner, and business just goes much smoother from an HR standpoint. But one of those constraints is having a person there. And, we need that, or we needed it up until the time we have technologies like, we're talking about today. So, that's a soapbox thing, but it's a big one for me, this delegating thing.
What was the breaking moment for you where you're like, okay, I'm bad at this and I've got to get better?
Oh, that's a good question. I don't know. I think it was when I read that book, but I think it must have been because some type of HR issues were, I don't remember a moment, to be honest with you, but it just was something I learned about. And then I decided I had to get better at it. And so I started reading and studying and learning. And then it was on the forefront of my mind all the time. What could I delegate here? How would I best delegate that? And it took, I failed again at it several times until I finally figured it out. And I still fail at it here and there, but I'm more comfortable with it and I know more about it.
I think in business, and I don't know if you feel the same way, that we use terms all the time: value, relationship, delegation, but then we're actually not talking about how to do it. What are the technical skills that you've learned around delegating? Because I think we all know, and I'm equally as guilty of it, because sometimes I'm like, well, I can do it. And then you sign up for 55 of those things a day where you're just totally underwater. What are some of the skills you've developed or learned about that have helped you actually delegate well?
That's such a great question. I right off the top of my head, a real important thing is to pay attention to red flags. We all have staff who's been with us for a long time. We have people, we have personal relationships along with business relationships that work for us, and we care about them. And we often overlook certain things that are behaviors or things they do that are really red flags, and creating those constraints in your ability to grow, earn, profit, and all those things. And as a business owner, you owe it to yourself, you owe it to your family to not think things are going to get better if they aren't better by a certain point, and make the changes you need to make, whether it's personnel or otherwise, to improve your business. You owe it to your patients as well. So I'm guilty also of like kind of looking past red flags. But once I realized that, how important that was, I was much better at delegating tasks. So this is how they come together, right? I would delegate something to someone and they wouldn't get it done. And then maybe I'd just forget about it, or say, oh, well, that didn't work, or, but really when you finally get a person in there who you delegate something and they do it, you're like, oh, this is great, right? You never know until you make the change. And often you have to make the change because that's a constraint in your ability to grow and, live the work-life balance you want to work.
This is awesome. Are you familiar with Alex Hermosi?
I've heard the name, but
he's wrote like a couple, books about scaling larger businesses. And
scaling.
There's two things that I think you've nailed about delegation, and they'll be a little conflicting, but I think they're both really good. What he talks about, and I even have a hard time swallowing in my own statement here, is when you delegate, you have to understand and be okay with 80% of what you expect out of yourself. And what I mean by that is not everything is always going to be done in a perfect way. But if you can have 5 people doing 80% of what you do every single day, your greater sum is 4 times you. It's 400%. And so it is the first understanding to delegate is if you think it's going to be perfect, no one else is an owner of a practice except you. And that is why you deliver exceptional care. So you have to be willing to relinquish to scale, and you can continue to improve that 80%. And then the second thing that I don't think we do when we delegate is we often just hand something over. But what I think is a really good question when we delegate is then, hey, Alan, I'm going to give this to you. What is, success to me when you do this? Okay, I hired someone to be my scribe, or I hired someone to verify insurance. It's not just that you're verifying insurance. We roughly think answering 5 phone calls an hour or 8 phone calls an hour and scheduling X number of new patients and X number of existing patients a day then allows there to be a North Star of delegated success. And what that does is it drives really clear expectations. So when you hand things over, they then know, oh, I'm just not answering the phones, or I'm just not scribing. They're actually driving somewhere with you, and they're helping get those deliverables done instead of just saying, oh yeah, he gave this to me. It's actually being defined of what success does, and that creates alignment in supporting the practice's goals.
Yeah, and also when you assign something, make sure that they see it from your point of view, how important it is to the growth of the practice and their future with the business, not threatening their job, but like, here's what you're doing here. You're not just booking appointments, you're keeping everyone in this office fed, because appointments are they're the bread and butter of this practice. Tell them how important it is. It's not just a job, do this, do that. It's you're a critical member of our support staff.
Yeah, connecting things to the why and the mission of the practice.
Yeah, exactly.
Is a super, super big point. And I agree, delegation for all of us as business owners, no matter the size, is one of those things. Now, what I think is important to talk about is, okay, we have, just as I said when we got started, the ability to see a ton of different practices and under the hood in many different ways. So what happens if you can delegate these roles well? And, we have 700 plus optometry team members today, and we're seeing a lift in the number of patients ODs are seeing. We're seeing a 260K increase in revenue in practices that are focused on delegating and having their team members focused on areas that they know they're missing. They're getting better notes. They're seeing more patients. And then more on the soft side is people are less burned out. If we think about ourselves where you clinically practice 8 hours a day, and then you go home to read the financials, post the marketing on social media, send out emails to other suppliers and to vendors, you're burned out. And your staff is in that same exact position. And so when you can delegate and elevate you and your team and augment with virtual team members, there really is not just nice words that we saw about handing off tasks on the prior page, but if you do it, you can see a meaningful difference in driving a more profitable practice and caring for more patients.
No argument there.
I know that we're getting ready to wrap up here, and I actually want to kick back for a second, and then I'll begin the process of wrapping up. Just as we talked about on the profitability and cost side, what are you seeing in innovative and modern practices on, the staffing and HR side that is setting others apart?
Just on the staffing and HR side, I mean, clearly, virtual assistants are becoming more mainstream, more acceptable. I think that there are still people have a lot of questions, especially people over 40 years old who aren't used to that ability. And I'm going to ask you in a minute to explain something to your audience, because I know they have these questions in their heads as I would if I was hiring. But that and implementing technology, this is an implementation of technology. On an HR, solving an HR challenge, and implementing technologies that are new that solve clinical challenges and other business challenges. These are all things that we have to stay on top of and implement. I'm not going to give any examples of any of them right now, but when you go to a convention, the halls are filled with new solutions to old problems, and as long as there are people innovating, there will continue to be new solutions to old problems. This is one of the newer solutions. And I think a question on a lot of people's mind is, okay, I mean, the idea makes sense, but who are these people and how could they possibly be trained to answer my phones in my office? It's a job that it takes months for me to train them. And then, then what if they're not the same person every day? And those are the kind of simple questions that you can answer that I think will answer that'll solve a lot of these problems and help people understand what you're doing and how you do it better.
Yeah, no, and I'm glad because I think outsourcing is to some degree taboo within America. And I look back at early in my career and I probably would have sworn I would have never outsourced anything. I ran a call center with 300 people here in Salt Lake City, Utah, jam-packed in. And just as you said, COVID hit, we had a bunch of people. We couldn't keep up. If we rolled out $2 increases to everybody, and then we were doing that every 2 or 4 months, we were going to go bankrupt. And so we originally hired one person out of Argentina and one person out of Brazil. And what I realized myself is there's wickedly good talent around the world. And as we all know from having traveled internationally, the dollar goes farther in some places. Just like if I'm in the middle of the United States in a small town, my dollar goes farther than it does in downtown Manhattan for the day. And so, predominantly our teams are coming out of Latin America and the Philippines, and practices are selecting and choosing who they get to hire. Something that I deeply believe in is if, you just hired a place filler in the traditional way of outsourcing where you're not communicating and you don't know who you're working with, you're going to get really subpar quality. And so the reason team is named team is we're about integrating people into the practices so that people can get the cost effectiveness that we just talked about here. But at the same time, they get the reliability of someone who can come in with healthcare knowledge and someone who can come in for the long term as a dedicated part of their team and then learn the nuances of here's the insurances we take and here's how we can't handle last minute cancellations and here's the technology and the different ways that we use it. And so I think outsourcing in its traditional model is broken because there's a lack of communication, and that lack of communication gets associated back to when I call T-Mobile, they don't actually work for T-Mobile, they work for a big outsourcing company. They're just pushing their problems away. What we want to do is bring the cost-effective people and bring the practices who actually need the help and marry those two together so you get the best of integrated team members, but at the same time, cost effectiveness.
So you get to choose your team member. You can interview them. You can make sure you're comfortable with them, the way they sound, their cadence, all that stuff. That's great. I did not know that.
And when we start, we're then sitting down and saying, okay, do you want someone Spanish and English? Because we're predominantly out of Latin America. And what kind of personality works in your practice? If we're just showing up and saying, hey, you've got Jim Bob, you're going to love him. We actually want to know what are the major long-term things you know make your team successful and you know you need within your practice. We took, just to give you some numbers, 30,000 applications on our website last month.
Wow.
We hired 98 people. And so our goal is to sift the wheat from the tares so that practices can get that reliable, cost-effective talent that they need to solve these long-term profitability problems.
Amazing.
What other questions? I actually think these are really good. And what other questions do you think people have that may have not been addressed?
Well, what about cost?
We're $11 an hour.
Okay.
And then
That
we'll
works.
discuss
In
that
Maryland.
Say again?
Yeah, I can't think any. I mean, those are the two, like those questions that I asked first were the ones that would keep me from even considering it until they were answered. So you answered those, and the other ones are kind of they're kind of incrementally. They may or may not result in me choosing or not choosing, but those were the two big ones. I want to understand who that person is and how they fit into my practice, not being in my practice, and especially being foreign. Are they going to answer the phone with an accent? Are they going to answer the phone, culturally? Is it going to sound like they fit in? Do they understand the culture within my practice, and how do you get them to do that? Those are the kind of things I would wonder.
And you're probably familiar with BYU, Brigham Young University.
Of course.
We have a partnership, so not all of our hires come from this direction. But BYU has a program called BYU Pathways, and that allows people internationally to attend BYU virtually. And then when they graduate, we get access to their records. And you just nailed something really important. How do we get really good English, not just written, but also spoken, so that there's a minimal or non-existent accent? When you get 30,000 applications and we take their audio as part of the upfront recruiting process, we can find the cream of the crop.
That's great.
And we can find people who have that minimal or non-existent, because people don't expect or want an accent when they're calling into their practice. They have that familial kind of close feeling with. And then what it also allows us to do through that partnership and through other ones is we can hire people who have actually done US education. And because of that, they get a little bit more experienced into how does culture within the United States work? So then when they start with a practice, they're not just getting trained in areas of optometry, they're actually coming with some base knowledge of US culture.
That's great.
It's
not a 2014 call center.
No. And that was my feeling too. I mean, I remember as a kid when Wells Fargo would decline my debit card at 16 when I'd have to call in, I was like, these guys don't get me. And that was my thoughts here too. And I've realized there's wickedly talented people, but you actually have to fix the system. When things don't work, as you know, there's a people or a process issue. I've realized the people are really good, but the model of outsourcing is broken, and our goal is to do it different at Team.
Excellent.
A few other things that I want to note, because I think they're important, is when you're practicing 8 hours a day or whatever people here do practice, a question we get frequently asked is, well, how do you do the training? Because knowledge into optometry is pretty nuanced. And there are times that we can frequently find people with healthcare, or someone may value sales or customer support experience. But what we've built, and I would love your feedback on it as well, is a training system where a practice can come on and say, we use Revolution and we use Addit, and we're hiring someone to be a scribe. And then it is actually bringing out in our LMS the training that is relevant just to those systems. So what we don't want to do is go, hey, you're getting an awesome virtual assistant that knows optometry, and then we taught them a day on CompuLink, a day on, you know, all of these other Crystal and other systems, and then they come and they don't have this deep knowledge. We realize that there's no one in the practice that has time to do the training, and instead of just saying we sprayed them for 1 or 2 weeks with a hose and then we call them trained, let's hire the right people based on the personality and the skills needed. And then let's provide the training that is actually relevant to what you need to delegate within your practice.
And then you're going to have, you know, you're going to have to, they're going to have to become familiar with each office's specific policies, like a copy of the manual. How do you manage that?
So this is, and I'm glad you brought this up. Where we believe we can do a really good job is helping set the foundation of basic training in these, you know, EHR, in patient engagement, and in the role specific areas. We acknowledge and realize that every practice out of the 30 to 40,000 practices in the United States runs different. And so we want to make the 80% of the knowledge training easier. The practice specifics need and have to come from meeting with the individual team members. But instead of saying, you've got to train on Revolution, you've got to train on everything about scribing, you've got to train on VSP, let's do that. So then they're just finishing and painting the rooms and adding the furniture to the house.
Gotcha.
And then in closing here, guys, I just want to share one other thing. You nailed it. And I think it actually gives us a really good closing point here. We are used to working in a office and practice where we see what each other are doing. If I had gone to you years ago and said, hey, how's your front desk team doing? What would have your typical response been?
Good.
And I know I asked the question with no context there, so it's very, very on purpose.
You said no hardballs today, Cory.
Hey, I had to sneak in one shot.
Did not say that. I can handle it. How's my front desk doing? I mean, from what perspective? You know, if I'm happy with them, I mean, typically if I'm not happy with them, they're gone, you know, and like they're not working with us anymore. So I guess good would be about as detailed as I could give you right now.
Yeah. And I think that's actually interesting, because if you think about most things that centralize in an optometry practice happen around the EHR. Most things that happen out of the front desk are related to new and existing patient phone calls and communication. There wasn't a lot of data for a long time. And we realized then when you go remote, it's like, okay, I just can't say Cory at his remote front desk job is doing good. And so what we've built here at Team is a software that all of our practices can log into. And this is where they also get the Team University training to make that easier. But they actually get to see the number of text messages sent, the number of new patients scheduled, and they can then define what does success look like in the role. Instead of just saying, oh, it's good, when we sit down and provide our team members, we want to make the training easier. We want to give you the best possible people at a reasonable cost, but then we want you to be able to see that value was actually provided so that we can make this a long-term gig with the practice and a stable, meaningful job to people around the globe who really need and deserve the money. Dr. Glazier, super appreciate you being willing to hop on with us today. I think you have an amazing view of the community, and you've built, in my opinion, the best community out there for people to go on and share. And you think about years ago when people wanted to innovate or collaborate, you had to go to a conference, and you've built a digital forum where people can share how they're driving better profitability and where they're struggling. And so we really appreciate being a partner with you. and you've made a very meaningful impact to us, and I think the greater community. So thank you so much.
And thanks for bringing a team to the profession. I think it's amazing, and it's definitely something that's sorely needed. Hopefully people will appreciate that you've probably tackled every challenge there is around considering this as an option. And it sounds like you've been pretty thorough with that. So thank you.
Well, just as you said, the world changes really quick, and we've got to continue to innovate. Before I wrap up, is there anything you want to add based on the subjects we've discussed?
Where can people find more out about Team?
So right here, hey, thank you for the tee up question. I appreciate that. I give you the
not my first rodeo.
I give you the low ball question, and you're just teeing it back to us. Obviously, we've discussed on how virtual assistants can make a significant difference in helping with those HR and staffing issues, and at the same time, helping with driving profitability in a world where cost is going up like crazy. So here you guys do see a QR code. You can use your phones or whatever you want to click on that. And this will allow you, if you do take a demo or a call with us this week, you'll get a $50 gift card from us. And then in addition, if you do sign up due to this webinar this week, you'll also get an iPad from us. Why we do this is not just have an iPad, but we realize that having that iPad allows you to flip your team member up and have them join your morning huddles, to take around someone from exam lane to exam lane to do scribing and really drive that efficiency.
Very cool. Great idea.
So everybody, thank you for coming. This has been fantastic. I continue to learn as I do these things. And Dr. Glazier, you've been an amazing guest today.
Thank you, Cory.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great rest of your day.